Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss The Naked Gun 2.5, The Smell of Fear, starring Leslie Nielsen, Priscilla Presley, George Kennedy, O.J. Simpson, Robert Goulet, Richard Griffiths, Jacqueline Brooks, and Anthony James, directed by David Zucker. Now, I haven't seen these originals, so let's just get straight to it. We started in Washington, D.C., where Lieutenant Frank Drebin, returned by Leslie Nielsen, happens to be there with Commissioner Brumford, played by Jacqueline Brooks, and others, including psychiatrist Dr. Albert Meinheimer, played by Richard Griffiths, whom I reviewed before in Harry Potter and Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides, to celebrate the President of the United States of America, which happens to be, at the time anyways, George H.W. Bush, with other leaders of other countries, as Frank makes himself look like an idiot with the Madam President, which was laugh out loud funny. They moved to Washington, D.C. with the siren going through different locations, and I thought that was clever. And Jane Spencer, returned by Priscilla Presley, is approached by Dr. Meinheimer about her love for Frank, as she's sad about it. And I'm thinking to myself, are they divorced? And were they ever married to begin with? As he did propose to her at the end of the last movie, as the relationship was a problem with this movie from the get-go. Frank gets to a crime scene with Ed Hawken, returned by George Kennedy, as he sees Jane and stares at her, and they reunite as she has a new boyfriend named Quentin Hapsburg, played by Robert Goulet, whom I reviewed as the voice of Wheezy in Toy Story 2, and he was Maxie Dean in Beetlejuice, the first Beetlejuice, not that sequel, who's an oil man, while Frank is jealous of her dating an oil man. And based on that, I know he's the bad guy based on Frank's jealousy. And some of the characters I like, and some I don't, while Frank joins Ed for a drink. And did everybody move from LA to Washington, D.C., which was another thing that was a problem right off the bat. Frank gets a drink from Jane as Ed forces him to go to her, as he does, and the piano player Sam plays a song from The Wizard of Oz, which is Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead, which was amusing. And I will get to Wizard of Oz later this year, leading up to the new Wicked film, as he says something very insulting, and she tries to slap him with both hands, and he catches both of them as a third hand slaps him and yells about it. How he is single and how much he loves being single. And we move on to Quentin making a deal that the cops don't know about, as he captured Dr. Meinheimer and trades him with Earl Hacker, who's played by a younger version of Richard Griffiths, as he tries to make it go the oil company's way, while we go back to the cue of this movie, which, for the life of me, I'm forgetting his name, giving Frank more gadgets, and brings Nordberg, returned by O.J. Simpson, as well as Ed. And this plot is a little thin for me, as this isn't as funny nor as good as the first movie. Ed finds Hector Savage, played by Anthony James, getting away with as Nordberg. Ed and Frank go after him, and this chase sequence was fine, but not as great as in the first movie, while Hector gets to a house surrounded by the cops, and Frank pats one of the cops in the back, and he fires his gun while Hector demands a nice car so he can go to Jamaica. And Frank crashes a tank in the house, as he doesn't see where he's going and accidentally breaks into a zoo and gets some of the animals out of there, which was a tad bit stupid, but obviously this doesn't take itself too seriously. And we move on to a party, and the commissioner is upset after a phone call about Frank letting animals out of the zoo, as they're ruled by them. And Frank has suspicions about Quentin while they dance, and Hunter's her, and yeah, rips off Jane's dress, which was amusing at best until Quentin wants Frank and James to join him, as he gets encountered by Dr. Meinheimer, or Earl, as he's disguised as Dr. Meinheimer, and he gets his wheeled, and as he gets wheeled to on stage tries to make a speech, but it goes humiliating for the both of them as he flies out of the building, as that was amusing at best. Frank visits Jane at her apartment, as she has a cat, dog, chickens, and a few pigs, And I'm like, is she at the zoo? While Hector happens to be at the building, as Frank wants to talk with Jane while she climbs in a refrigerator and gets trapped in it as he suspects Quentin as a bad person. And Hector walks into Jane's apartment and attacks Frank in a slapstick way after Hector tries to kill Jane while she was in the shower, like with a toothbrush versus a hairdryer and a towel as a few examples. And it ends with Frank putting a fire hose in his mouth and makes him pop up as she believes Frank is right and Quentin wants her dead. And the acting in this is just alright, as it's not great in my opinion, as this doesn't feel very realistic, but that's okay because it's a comedy. Frank and Jane smooch while Elvis Presley's music plays in the background, which felt weird because Priscilla was married to Elvis when he was alive, may he rest in peace. And we see things blowing up in the background because Frank and Jane are together again as we move on to Frank and Ed breaking into Quentin's oil building in the bay with Nordberg, while Quentin and his men watch a short movie about oil, while Frank encounters some killer dogs called Dobermans, as Frank captures one and gets attacked by the dog, and Nordberg falls upside down, and Frank breaks into the building as they smell raw sewage as he signals it, and Ed tries to get out of the van but is trapped, while the real Dr. Meinheimer is there, as he also meets the fake, aka Earl, as Frank gets away with pouring oil on Dr. Meinheimer as well as knocking him out. And this movie is preposterous, but not in a bad way, I guess. Ed walks in and finds the captain of the ship and beats him up while Nordberg happens to be there, and Commissioner Brumford alerts everyone if Frank and his police squad show up to arrest them on first sight, as Frank and Ed, Nordberg, and Dr. Meinheimer get to the room, where the doctor makes a speech as they disguise themselves as the four caballeros, as they sing a song as that was clever, and Nordberg gets off the stage as Frank gets beat up by some people defending Earl, and he attacks Earl, as he gets knocked out and sits in his wheelchair and stands up while Earl runs out of the room, and Dr. Meinheimer comes on stage, and Frank humiliates himself as well as Dr. Meinheimer. And Frank goes after Quentin to get Jane, whom he has as a hostage, while Dr. Meinheimer makes a speech. And is this sequel necessary? Absolutely not, as this isn't as good nor funny as the first movie. And this is why sequels to comedies are a very bad idea, because you can't tell the same joke a second time. Frank talks to a couple of low-life criminals, and then Jane is brought out, Quentin is brought out with Jane as a hostage, and he starts a time to blow up the room in 10 minutes. And who's the only one that knows the code? It's Quentin himself, while Nordberg drops in and Frank and Quentin fights it off as Ed comes in and tosses him off the building without the code, which was so dumb in so many levels. And Jane comes with Frank to deactivate the bomb as it goes quicker than usual, while Ed and Nordberg interrupt Dr. Meinheimer's speech and to wake people up as everyone awakens to tell everybody calmly exit the building until Nordberg says there's a bomb in the building, and Frank trips on a plug just to unplug it, which feels so unrealistic, as Frank becomes the hero and they make him a Federal Bureau of Police squad as he declines because of Jane and he wants to be with her. And the climax was mediocre at the end of the day, but how mediocre was this movie? Let's talk about it. I'll give this movie a 5.7 out of 10. The opening scene in the White House was the funniest part of the movie, as this isn't as good nor funny as the first movie. While there were times it was clever, as the relationship between Frank and Jane was a problem with me. Like, did they get divorced? Did they ever get married like they were proposing at the end of the first movie? As that was problematic from the get-go. Same goes with the location. Like, did everybody move from LA to Washington, D.C.? And some of the characters I like and some I don't. The plot is a little thin, as the chase sequence was fine but not as great as in the first movie, as this was a tad bit stupid. But obviously, it doesn't take itself too seriously, while this movie isn't too funny but amusing at best. And the acting in this is just alright. As it's also not great in my opinion, as this doesn't feel realistic, but that's okay because this is just a comedy. The movie is preposterous, but not in a bad way, as the first movie's humor is better than the humor in this film, in which I thought was just alright, as this is a mild recommendation for this movie because this is an unnecessary sequel, as sequels to comedies are a very bad idea because you can't tell the same joke a second time, and the climax was just mediocre at the end of the day. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me, and I will be back with the Naked Gun 33 and 1/3 quarter or something like that. I don't know what that title is. And until then, don't humiliate yourself.